Wonder Woman 1984 is the sequel to the first Wonder Woman film that took place around the time of World War I. Diana was getting out into the world for the first time, and in this one she's been there for about 70 plus years now. She is now living in 1984 in America. She's still trying to protect people, but she's got to keep her identity a secret, try to keep the Wonder Woman persona hidden from the world, so she's doing stuff very secretly. But after a robbery kind of gone wrong, there's a stone that is discovered that is linked to ancient history that she takes an interest in, but also Maxwell, Lord, played by Pedro Pascal, also does. He's a failed businessman trying to revitalize his career, and this stone may be what helps. I was really excited for this movie because I did like the first Wonder Woman movie. I wasn't like in love with it, but I did like it enough. I did see where it could have been better though. It definitely has its issues, but when I recently found out that Patty Jenkins's big issue is that third act action sequence that feels out of nowhere, which is one of my big issues too, I was like, okay, now that she definitely probably has more creative freedom this time around, I'm excited to see her vision just completely uninterrupted, at least from what we know, by Warner Bros. Execs. I'm glad that she's at least able to create a new story just entirely from her and Jeff Johns. The trailers look really fun. I was really excited to see it in theaters, but then, of course, I keep mentioning it, but and it's worth repeating, the COVID pandemic obviously shut the world down. This movie got pushed back a lot. Like, is it coming out August? How about October? November? Nah, Christmas Day in theaters, but also HBO Max the same day, which has obviously caused a lot of controversy that I won't dig into now because it's not even worth talking about in a Wonder Woman review, but there are other videos that you can check out talking about it. I at least had some comfort in knowing that I didn't have to go to a theater to see a new release. You know, it was at least right here. Even though that is kind of a bummer, I don't think this will be the death of cinema because this is just a one-year plan, but who knows if that's what's going to end up happening or what else happens in the world. I was just grateful because there's a lot of new releases that I've been excited for, but it's been like, you know, you got to go to a theater to see these specific ones, so I was at least grateful for the option to see this. So I was really excited yesterday, Christmas Day, to watch Wonder Woman 1984. I was very excited. I was very let down by Wonder Woman 1984. Let's talk about what I did like first, though. The score by Hans Zimmer is great. He's obviously one of the greatest composers out there. I heard the Wonder Woman theme, like the one that he and Junkie XL came up with in Batman v Superman, but redone. So I was like, okay, I'm glad it's not just the same thing, because even considering the rest of this movie's musical score, it would have felt so jarringly out of place. It's a good score. They capture the era very well with the 80s costumes and the color. It's really great, their set design, and they go back to Themyscira briefly in the beginning of the movie, and that still looks really great. And it's hard not to be entertained by a lot of the action sequences in this movie. The opening one on Themyscira, I've heard some people say it doesn't tie into anything, which yeah, the actual action sequence, the games thing that they have, it doesn't really, that doesn't tie into anything specific, but the message of it does, so it's not like it's completely pointless. Overall, it's still fun to watch, though. Gal Gadot, this is actually my favorite performance by her as Diana Prince. I think she did a really great job. You can really tell how much she's improved since BVS to Wonder Woman, and then a downgrade in Justice League, but back up again for Wonder Woman 1984, better than ever. So that's really great to see that she's really taken this character and run with it and has actually improved playing her too. She's really good. And it's also fun to see Chris Pine back. He's a fun actor and he's fun with Diana. They have good chemistry. And the fish out of water jokes, they don't overdo it to the point where it's happening like every single scene. There's points where they're like, okay, let's cut it out. This is supposed to be kind of a serious moment where we're not focusing on fish out of water jokes. So I was relieved by that because I was kind of worried, like, is this just going to be like throughout the entire movie? And it wasn't. And he also plays it cool. He's not like, oh my God, like overacting. He's like just perfectly cool and kind of like excited surprise, not like, like scared. And my last thing I wanted to mention is that Pedro Pascal as Maxwell Lord, he is a lot of fun in this movie. Not just because he's hamming it up and he's just a really fun actor to watch. He's got so many great jokes. It's not really that why I found him so fun, but because they actually did a really good job of building up that villain character, of giving him more than one dimension. You know, you understand his sympathetic backstory, and then when you understand what it is he's after, you're like, oh, I can see, I understand the motivation, and now we're just along for the villainous ride. You know, you can see how his life has kind of led to this moment, and you kind of feel for him too as the movie goes on. There's a certain point kind of in the third act where I was like, oh, this is kind of getting to me just a bit. They did a good job of establishing this character and having an actor who did a really great job playing him. But now as I get into my negatives, I will try to structure it as like small issues to like the bigger ones I overall have with the movie. So let's talk about it. First of all, there's still some visual effects shoddiness like left over from the first Wonder Woman movie almost, where like you see something, it's like, that's definitely a green screen. I'm overly shocked. Like, this movie cost $200 million to make. There's so many comic book movies now that cost either $200 million over or a little below, and they still somehow manage to have like bad green screen moments in a couple of these movies every once in a while, and it's so weird that that happens still. Or I guess it's not weird to see it in movies, in modern movies, but it's just weird when you see it in like these really big expensive ones. And there's also moments where like the way they edit certain things, it doesn't really look like it flows. Like, there's a moment where a log is coming at like the young Diana in the opening scene, and she gets down and lets the log roll over her, but you see how thin the space is between the log and the ramp she's running on. There's no way she would be able to get under it completely. So there's just kind of moments like that that kind of took me out of it, where she's like flying on her lasso, but it looks like a weird float kind of thing, where it probably should look a little bit like Spider-Man swinging on a web, like it's fast. I don't know, like, it's stuff like that kind of took me out every once in a while. I did mention the fish out of water stuff earlier, and how I was relieved it wasn't like throughout the movie or overbearing, but there is a sequence where Diana and Steve Trevor, they wake up in bed, they have a cute moment, but then they kind of realize, like, we should do some investigating on something that's, you know, kind of time sensitive, and then just without any motivation, they just do fish out of water stuff, just 5 minutes of never-ending fish out of water stuff. Unmotivated, just, we need the fish out of water stuff here, so let's do it. Even though they just established they have to go do something, it would have been better if they kind of like did a better job of showing like these characters were on their way, but they got distracted, or Diana did. If they did a better job of kind of building up how much Diana needs this kind of escape. I'll touch more on that later. But as I said, it just feels unmotivated when they start to do like the fashion show kind of thing, where I'm trying on different outfits and they all look a little weird because they're from the 80s and I don't know 80s fashion. What looks good? Not that it was a bad sequence or anything, just in the moment of the movie, it felt out of place, and it should have, I think they could have done a better job of structuring if you really needed to have that scene. Also, there's a moment where they have to fly a jet, and Chris Pine is the one piloting, and he seems to fly it perfectly and have no issue. Like, he notices the buttons, the new buttons, and he's like, all right, and he just flies it perfectly. Now, I'm not trying to claim that I am an expert in flight, jets, planes, but I feel like there should be just some moment of like him messing up and he's like, oh, sorry, I got it under control, I'm a fast learner, I did some reading, but I'm still gonna make some, you know, mistakes, because I haven't flown a plane since World War I. You know, like he's amazed that there's a plane that can take 1 day to get from here to Cairo, you know what I mean? So that kind of leap in technology, especially for flight, I feel like there should have been something, but they needed him to fly, so they got to keep moving. Which is another thing, is that this movie kind of, it does a lot. It's a 2.5-hour movie, and they kind of speed through certain things. Like, noticeably, it kind of moves a little too quickly just for my liking. Like, there's the suit that you see her wear in the trailer, and the way they introduce it, it just feels like, hey, let's stop what we're doing right now and address what this is. And it's like, that's not really important for what's going on. If you wanted to introduce that, you can build it into the narrative in the beginning. But it just feels like we need to introduce it because she's going to learn that later, and we gotta introduce it. She's working on a new power, which I won't spoil because it is something tied to the comics. And when she just suddenly starts doing it, I was like, wait, what are you doing? And she explains, like, I tested it out on a coffee cup, but, you know, I lost it or something like that. And it's like, man, I feel like, once again, you could do a better job of building this kind of thing into the narrative, because it's kind of like that moment in Civil War where Ant-Man's like, I got something kind of big, but in the context of that movie, this isn't his solo movie, and we haven't seen him since the events of Ant-Man 1. So him turning giant is like, okay, yeah, they work in the context of this story and Captain America's story, and they bring in Ant-Man. It makes sense and it works, you're able to accept it. But this is Wonder Woman 2, she's leading it. And even in Justice League, there's not a moment where she uses this power, or BBS where she uses this power, where they take place after these two movies. which is, you know, a weirder conversation. Like some of the bigger stuff that happens in this, they just never bring up in BVS or Justice League, but yeah, whatever. They didn't make this movie yet when they were doing that. Who knows what they're doing with their timeline. But as I said, it's just, she just starts doing it and just explains like, oh, it's kind of like this thing that I'm not sure about, but then it works perfectly. Even though I've had like 70 plus years in the real world to kind of do stuff, I guess I haven't done this yet. I did want to address really quickly that I really do like Maxwell Lord in this movie because he introduces the theme of the film that's actually quite bold and kind of daring as far as like what the message is supposed to be. I was really impressed, and I admire Patty Jenkins for even attempting that. And I just wish that the secondary villain was about as strong as that one. The secondary villain being Barbara, played by Kristen Wiig, who becomes Cheetah. And I don't mind Kristen Wiig in the role. She's actually good. It's just everything that's going to eventually propel her to become Cheetah, I didn't care for, and I didn't particularly buy. You know, and not only is there just like bad acting in it, but you can't really blame them because the writing for them, like there's people that just ignore her, straight up ignore her, don't know of her existence, or when she starts to become like hotter, which is just taking off her glasses and straightening her hair pretty much and wearing more bold outfits instead of the dorky one she was wearing before, then you have people going like, hey, sexy, and shit like that. There's even a guy that's like, he comes up and he literally says, you want some coffee, tea? Me? And I was like, my God, I can't disassociate that phrase with Fred 2, Night of the Living Fred. And it's not Patty Jenkins' fault, but it kind of is. She wrote it in the movie. Just everything that propels her to be Cheetah is just so kind of cliche, and it doesn't have the proper, like, more sophisticated, and or maybe not even that, just smarter, like a little more subtle kind of nuance to have that character work. Where Maxwell Lord, they do a good job of just establishing who he is and how sympathetic he is and how he's been driven to this path. With this one, it's just kind of like, you know, we just need her to be Cheetah, so let's just, you know, engineer the world around her to be this way, not place this character in a real world kind of setting in the 80s, and that's what ultimately does it. Let's just change the people in it, you know, and I didn't really care for that, especially later on. She has a speech where she's like, women like you, Diana, were given everything while I was born with nothing, and I couldn't help but think, and I'm not trying to turn this into a bigger issue, but I couldn't help but watch that and think, lady, you are white. You just automatically are born with so much compared to others. If Barbara was maybe an African American woman or an Asian American woman, then you might have something going with a speech like that. But it's a white lady who is only this way because she's a nerd and everyone around her just acts like she's like this weird sociopath just because she's smart and kind of just dorky cute. Like, and I don't understand their motivation for it. People compare this character to like the Jamie Foxx Electro, which kind of, but even then, he's a little more crazy in Amazing Spider-Man 2. Whereas in this, she's just, you know, she's just a dork who unfortunately has bad writing to support her character arc. I don't even mind the cheetah CGI effect, like it's hidden in the dark, so maybe that helped, but it didn't look as unbearable as like Cats. Like it actually looked alright. But even that, it doesn't last too long, and even when she decides to be that, they probably should have done a better job of implying like she is such a weirdo that she admires these big cats, especially the cheetah, but they don't really establish anything. Like she's just like a normal dork that they just decide to make crazy. Like, for no real reason other than we just need a cheetah in this movie. The way this movie ends, there's two specific storylines, and I can't spoil it, but I feel like it could be kind of obvious. There's two specific storylines that they just don't really wrap up well enough because they need like this kind of hokey dokey smiles everywhere kind of ending, which, hey, you know, once again, it's part of the theme, it's part of the message. I'm not against that specifically, but you did leave these two things open that I think should be addressed at least, and it seems like you guys just wanted to focus just on the schmaltz of this ending moment. So for a while I thought those were like my only issues with the movie, and after I watched Soul, which by the way, if you haven't seen Soul yet, I don't know if I'll be able to do a full review in like the next couple days, we'll see, but I'll just give a brief one here. Fantastic, lovely, beautiful, made me cry. Great movie, you should watch that over Wonder Woman. It's the better Christmas Day release. But after I watched Soul and thought about that a lot, I then got back to Wonder Woman and I was like, there's something else about Wonder Woman that's bugging me. And what is it? What is it? What is it about Wonder Woman that felt off? And I realized what it was is that there's a point with Maxwell Lord where I felt so much sympathy for him, and Pedro Pascal's doing such a good job, and with what they've shown with him already, you feel for this character. And I thought about shedding a tear for him. I didn't cry, but I was like, man, it's kind of sweet. And if I did cry right now, I would say it feels earned. There's similar kind of moments with Diana Prince, with where she gets kind of emotional. And I was wondering, why am I not on board with this? And I'm only on board with feeling sympathy for the villain. And I know why. It clicked with me. I was like, oh, it's because we never once really lived with Diana, like, at all. The only scenes you get of her are when she's in the Wonder Woman outfit, beating up people in secret, even though she literally fights in a mall, where even though she does take out the security cameras, there's still, like, multiple witnesses in this mall, so she shouldn't really be that much of, like, a legend, and more of, like, oh yeah, she's just someone who's, like, in hiding and we don't know where she is. There's other moments where she's out in public like that. But other than that, there's other scenes where Diana is talking to somebody else, where she is telling them, I have never loved ever since I lost my past one, Steve, he died, and I don't know if I'll ever love again, I'm very alone. Other than just stating that to people, you never have moments where she feels it, where you feel it too. The only time you see her, like, at home by herself is, like, she's walking in and out of frame, like, somewhat out of focus in the dark, and at one point she's walking by pictures just her waist. You never see, like, her taking a look at these photos, because there's a scene where she's at a dinner, and she's just like, just one, that's me, and they take away the stuff, and that would have been a good point for her to go back, and for this specific moment, just look at the photos and ponder stuff, and you really get to feel the loneliness she does. And also, there's a moment where she's like, I need this one thing, you know, everything is so hard, everyone expects these things from me, I just need this one thing. But you never feel like what she's doing now in life is such a burden. You know, like, you don't get to see, like, her changing an identity or getting work in a new place in life because she doesn't age like everyone else. She has to keep moving around. You never really understand or get to witness how she does it. Because even in Batman v Superman and Justice League, you don't need to see how she's doing that stuff yet, because Wonder Woman 2 will probably explain that, you know? Because that's her solo movie, and at this point in time, this would probably be it, right? But they don't. they just kind of expect you to kind of get with it. And I was like, I'm not really feeling it. So ultimately, one of the things that holds this movie back, despite Gal Gadot being a good actress and doing this character well, even more so in this, she's definitely putting in the work. The movie doesn't do the same amount of work to uplift that and support it fully. You know, this movie, there's just so much of, like, stuff is happening. There is so much happening in this movie. And some stuff just, unfortunately, you can't register with and you can't connect with. And there's also, like, an implication of, like, how Steve Trevor is back. I won't give it away, but I was thinking for a bit, like, this is kind of weird, and I hope they at least bring up that this is bad. And they do, without going too deep into why it's bad and how gross and creepy it kind of is, which I guess makes sense because kids are watching it. This is more of a family Wonder Woman movie, but so I'm glad they at least addressed it. But it is one of those things that for a minute I was like, this is kind of weird, right? Right? So overall, I can admire Patty Jenkins for trying to do something bold and ambitious with this, because this definitely, from the get-go, sounds like a really interesting concept, how they're going to execute this theme and how they're going to grow Diana's character. It's very interesting in concept, but when they brought it to the big screen, or in this case, the home screen you got in the living room, it unfortunately just didn't have the proper execution. You know, I know they worked on this story for a long time, but it feels like some things could have been stripped away from this story to help hone in on exactly what they needed to do, or they just needed to add some more just to buff out everything. It's just so everything can feel a little smoother, because sometimes that can be the case. You can take some stuff out and, you know, the runtime is a little lighter, or if you add more stuff in, it's a longer movie, but certain things feel smoother, you know? Like, that's why a lot of TV is sometimes better than movie narratives, because they have more time. I'm gonna give Wonder Woman 1984 a C+. As much as I was entertained in certain parts of this movie, and it's got a good score by Hans Zimmer, good capturing of the era. Patty Jenkins does a pretty solid job behind the camera once again, hoping for the best with their Star Wars movie, and the acting is pretty much good for the main cast. It's just like a lot of the supporting, like, really small roles that just kind of, they say something and it's like, oh, maybe read that again or change the line so it's not as cliche and cartoony. And I don't even have a problem with this movie not being dark or being like really fluffy and fun. It's just, you gotta execute it well. And unfortunately, there's just too much in this movie that holds it back from greatness. This could have been the Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, or the Spider-Man 2, or Empire, I hate to say it, but it's the cliche thing to say, but the Empire Strikes Back for this Wonder Woman series. But unfortunately, it's just kind of, it's like the Spider-Man 3 of this, where there's definitely a great arc in there somewhere, but it's muddled by everything else going on, by the other issues. Although it still does have moments of greatness where you see the potential. Honestly though, I could see this grade maybe even going down in time, but I have no desire to rewatch it again to solidify that, so who knows? But if you've seen Wonder Woman 1984, leave in the comments below what you thought of it, and as always, thank you guys for watching. Make sure to subscribe. I'm Jackson Fulcher. See you guys next time.